Hello, podcast listeners. We know podcasts are a great way to catch up on a program that you may have missed on KSJE, and it's provided as a free service of this radio station. But you know, KSJE is now listener-supported, and so while you enjoy this podcast, we hope that you'll also take some time to join KSJE. Become a member today. It's quite easy to do. Just go to our website at ksje.com/support and pick the level of support that best matches your budget. Thanks again for listening. Here's your podcast.
Hi, this is Tracy Hales Bass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico. Today I'm talking with Patricia Galagan about her award-winning photography book, Fire Ghosts. Good morning, Patricia.
Good morning, Tracy.
Well, I have to say your book is absolutely gorgeous, and I appreciate why it won the Best New Mexico Book, and also another award for Best New Mexico Nature.
Well, thank you for the compliments. It was an honor to win the awards.
It's well deserved. And the thing about the book, you did these series of photographs with Philip Metcalf over the course of 7 years?
Yes.
And what I noticed with the essays giving evidence to that is that as the forest evolved after the fire, was that it changes.
Yes, it did change. Our perspective changed the more we worked on it.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that drew it to us, we had only lived in Santa Fe for about 3 years. We'd come from Virginia, which is very green and moist and never burns.
Mm-hmm.
And along came the Las Conchas fire in late June 2011. And from where we live in Santa Fe, we could see it day and night.
Mm-hmm.
Huge clouds of smoke during the day, and at night, hot spots that moved around in the mountains. And we had seen, of course, fires in the media, on television, smoke and flames, but we had never seen a real live fire with the naked eye, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And as visual artists, we were extremely interested in what it would look like afterwards. So it wasn't possible to go up and look during the time the fire burned for more than 30 days, but
Wow.
Eventually the roads opened up, and we went back to a place that we had been hiking in often, and the change was so devastating. We were in shock. It was completely and utterly changed from the way it had looked. So that was what got us interested in the first place.
You were familiar with it then when it was in full foliage.
Yes, we used to go up there to hike and take photos. And the thing about a fire is it is so transformative, especially a severe fire like the Las Conchas fire. I mean, any idea you had of how a forest should look, how it should smell, that was all gone. It was shades of gray and black, and it smelled like ash, and there was no sound because there were no animals, no birds. No leaves to blow in the wind. It was utterly transformed.
I think that one of the broader issues of this book is that you capture how it changed, that the forest was no more. I think that's why you called it Fire Ghosts.
Yes. Well, there are lots of books about forest fires, and they usually include flames and smoke jumpers and airplanes and retardant being dropped on the forest. There's none of that in this book. This is all about the aftermath.
Mm-hmm.
And so it shows what the forest looked like immediately afterwards and then over the next 7 years, because we were so hooked on this, and the way that it began to transform as the years passed, that we just couldn't stop going back. We even sold my husband's car to get a vehicle that could go into the forest roads.
Oh.
that was how dedicated we were.
To get that real close look.
And then in the process of seeing what was happening, there were definitely changes. Things began to grow back. And we realized we didn't really know very much about forest ecology. So we began to do some research, and we got in touch with William Dubuis, who's an author of many, many books, including A Great Aridness about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave us his perspective. And in his book, he mentions a scientist, Craig D. Allen, who was with the Geological Survey and has 30 years of experience as a research ecologist. And we spent a lot of time with him, really trying to understand what we were seeing.
Yeah, they each wrote an essay in the book to accompany the photographs, and those were very interesting.
They were. Let me tell you a little bit about them.
Great.
The first essay in the book is actually by Catherine Ware, who's the curator of photography at the New Mexico Museum of Art.
Mm-hmm.
And he set the photographs in the context of nature photography or landscape photography over the course of 50 or 60 years. And one point she makes is that let me just read you a few sentences of what she wrote.
Great.
He wrote, "The most famous landscape photographers of the early 20th century, among them Ansel Adams and Elliot Porter, chose to emphasize the beauty and variety of the world's wondrous topography. Their images were meant to inspire appreciation and protectiveness toward the planet that sustains us and a recognition that our actions upon it are not without consequences. Almost 50 years later, photographers are depicting signs of a much deeper disruption."
Yeah, she is quite well known for her curator of photography at the New Museum.
Yes, she is, and we first got to know her. We were in a show that she curated called Fire Season.
Mm.
And that was how we first became acquainted with her and with her interest in landscape photography and how it had progressed. She was also the curator of a show called Earth Now, which covered it was a very different kind of show, but it looked at the influence of man on the land.
And I think that's a major theme in the book.
Yes.
Not only with the photographs, but with the essays.
Well, Bill in particular, he was the first chairman of the Baez Caldera Trust. And so he had a very strong personal interest in what had happened to that area after the fire. And his essay is basically a personal look at how it affected him, his personal reactions to what he saw. And it includes, by the way, a really good description of the fire as it was burning.
Mm-hmm.
And he really, he addressed what he called the new reality as the world heads toward a climate tipping point.
Right. It definitely illustrates that climate change is a very real thing here. And here is proof, not only in their research, but in the photographs.
Well, let me read you a sentence that Bill wrote. "The present moment is undoubtedly a good time to enjoy what now exists, for the things we like may not exist for long. It is a good time, too, to fasten one's metaphorical seatbelt. In ecological terms, we can expect to careen through the decades ahead like a brakeless truck on a mountain road." I mean, doing this project really was a wake-up call for us. We were very naive. I mean, certainly we knew about climate change and droughts and that New Mexico and the whole Southwest was affected, but we really had no idea of the risk that natural settings face. And believe me, by the end of the time we had finished the book, we were well aware of it. We didn't have an idea to do a book until we were about 3 years into the project, until we began to understand that through the process of taking the pictures, we had learned a great deal, and we wanted to share that and help more people be aware of what was going on.
And I think that's why this is an important book, because it illustrates it right there in black and white and a little bit of color. What happens? What's going on?
Well, let me explain a little bit about how we ended up, how we divided the photographs.
Oh, yes.
Philip, my late husband, he photographed in black and white, and his natural inclination was to photograph the destruction, the burned trees, the very stark landscape. And he worked in infrared. He had a camera that was converted to capture the infrared spectrum, and that added to the drama of the photos. So the first half of the book is his portfolio of those photos. And the second half of the book is my portfolio. I started out doing black and white, which I usually do, and then I began to notice that certain colors were coming back, and I devised a technique for desaturating the images and then just bringing back the color that was most apparent in certain scenes. And it was new to me, and it really helped me, I think, to develop my vision of what I was seeing.
And you, too, had been photographing for a long time before this.
Oh, yes. We both had careers. Philip worked in bank marketing in New York City.
Oh, my.
And I had worked for a long time as a writer and editor, but we had always been avocational photographers. We had looked at it, collected it, practiced it virtually our whole adult lives. And then after we retired, we had the luxury of pursuing it much more deeply.
And there are many more of your photographs on your website, patriciagalaganphotography.com.
Yes.
I looked at those and was quite impressed, too.
And Philip has a website as well, philipmetcalf.com.
Okay, great. He doesn't have photography after that, just philipmetcalf.com.
Yes.
Great. So you've been taking all kinds of nature photographs for a while. So this must have been a little bit different. I think that, was it Alan who talked about the shrubbier future?
It was Craig Allen. That's a phrase he coined. He has been studying, he's been doing tree ring research for about 3 decades, and really wrote very eloquently in the book about how drought and rising temperatures are changing the situation for forests, not just here in New Mexico or the American Southwest, but in other temperate parts of the earth. And one thing he pointed out to us, and it was very clear as we progressed through the 7 years, that things were growing back, but they weren't the things that had been there before.
Right.
For instance, there were very few ponderosa pines that were growing back. There were some aspens, which had been there before, but it was more the things that were kind of taking over were the shrubbier plants like gamble oak, which is a short, almost like a bush oak, and thorny locust. So the look and feel was not like a forest. It was more like a hills covered with these shrubs.
I found that fascinating when he talked about the rings and the ring study on the trees and what you could learn through that. And also the fact that it's a new landscape.
Yes. Sorry, I can read a sentence from his essay that addresses that. He says, "This fire-molded landscape evokes both poignant memories of once glorious ancient forests now forever lost, as well as a growing awareness of the increasing inevitability of novel future states, including the prospect of a generally shrubbier future for the Jemez Mountains and for other areas in the interior West."
Yes, shrubbier. I liked that term.
Shrubbier.
And you also worked with Carolyn Florek?
Yes, She is an artist based in Santa Fe, and she did an original map for us of the footprint of the fire, locating it in New Mexico. It's centered around the Valles Caldera, and it's about, from top to bottom, it's about 30 miles, and it's uneven in its outline, but at its widest points, it's about 20 miles. And
wow.
Carolyn did a really lovely job on the map.
It was fascinating also. It really tied things together.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry that your husband has passed. Are you continuing your photography?
Oh, yes.
Good.
Absolutely. In fact, it's been, I have to say, it's been very sustaining during both the start of learning to be a widow combined with the pandemic. But fortunately, Philip was alive when the book was published. It came out in October 2019, and he died about a month later, so he was actually able to see it and hold it. And we had a book signing, and so he was able to see how people reacted to it.
Oh, good. Well, very gratifying, I'm sure.
Yes.
And it's like you've taken this tragedy and turned it into something beautiful, something educational, and something, a message also.
Well, it's interesting you should say that. And in the discussions, some of the discussions we had with Kate Ware, she said to us, "Why are you photographing dead trees?" And that led to a discussion of what we realized we were actually doing was trying to make beautiful photographs of a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she made the point that has often been the way that photography invites people into a subject.
Oh, that's true. Absolutely. A subject we might not want to look into, like the fire and what happened. But this definitely does invite you, and it is gorgeous. Just very impressive. Would you like to read a little bit from maybe the introduction that you've written?
Sure. Yes. This project has been a lesson in incremental seeing. The new growth that began in the forest almost immediately after the fire hinted at restoration. But when we showed our photographs to forest ecologist Craig Allen, he told us about the science of burned and water-starved forests and their likely future in an era of accelerating climate change. We had to stop thinking that the new forest would be a restored copy of the one that had burned. It would never be. In 1977, Susan Sontag, in her book On Photography, wrote, "All photographs are memento mori." In the most direct sense, our photographs are about the death of a forest, a sudden, violent death by fire, of things we count on a forest to embody: color, scent, coolness, shadow, order, continuity, beauty. Our work depicts a process that began with death, but moved quickly to this and other forests' most essential task in our time, adaptation to a hotter, drier world.
Now, the photographs that are contained in here, I'm sure, are only a sampling of the many that you took. Was it difficult to pick out the ones to use for this?
It was daunting. We literally took thousands of images, which is extremely easy to do in the days of digital photography.
Right.
But the way we both worked was we would go out for a day and shoot, and come back, download the photographs onto our computers, and then go through them, and while things were fresh in our minds, make selections. And we would do that over and over and over, and we just kept winnowing it down. And then when we started working on the book and realized we wanted to show the destruction and the regrowth, that guided our selections as well. Mm-hmm. And then we also got input from Kate and Bill and Craig and David Skulkin, the designer of the book, and Joanna Hurley of Hurley Media, who helped edit it. And all of that helped us decide what to do. I don't know if this is true of all photographers, but Philip and I always found that with the passage of time, we had different opinions about what we liked.
Right. That makes sense. And you mentioned that when you first started the photographs of the burn area, you didn't know that you were going to continue this over the time and compile it all into one progressive book.
No, we had no idea. We were just really satisfying our visual curiosity, and we began exploring new parts of the forest. A forest fire doesn't burn in any kind of consistent way, and so there were many different looks and feels to different parts. And as I said, it was only after about 3 years of doing this that we realized that it would be, we wanted to do a book.
Mm-hmm. Do you have other books out?
Not published by a real publisher. I have, Philip and I both did books that we self-published.
Oh.
It's easy to do now in photography. There are lots of services that will produce books.
Right.
And we have done several, but, you can't buy them in a store.
Right, I understand.
You can actually. You can buy some of them online. They're on a service called MagCloud, MAGCLOUD.
Okay.
Or Blurb, BLURB. That's the parent company.
Well, I know that it might be easy to self-publish, as you say, but it's not. It's definitely art and talent and knowing to take these photographs that are so significant.
Well, I have to say, it certainly was a growth experience for us, both photographically speaking. But I would also say that doing a book like that over a long period of time, it's not for the faint of heart.
Oh, I imagine. Especially in such a critical area.
Yes.
That had been so loved and then so destroyed.
Yes. I know we were not alone in the feelings of sadness and loss and devastation because it was just so utterly transformed.
Oh, yes. And what is happening in that area today?
Well, there have been attempts to reintroduce ponderosa pine. They're not going terribly well because of drought, increasingly dry conditions. There was a group that planted, I think, several thousand seedlings, and not very many of them made it. But now, when you go back, the birds have returned, animals have returned. You would still obviously know there had been a fire because there's lots of blackened stumps and tree trunks and, in fact, whole hillsides of dead trees. But the growth is filling in.
Good.
It's not what it was, but it is definitely alive.
Interesting. It's interesting the way nature heals itself and adapts.
Yes, it is, and that's an important part of what's happening. There is a massive adaptation going on as a reaction to increased heat and drought.
Right. And again, as we've been talking about, such a perfect illustration of climate change. And DeWeese talks about, he has a book, A Great Aridness, Climate Change and the Future of American Southwest.
Yes, his book, A Great Aridness, is a wonderful book. He's a terrific writer. He does his research. He knows the history of the area and of drought. It was, I wouldn't want to say entertaining because it's difficult subject matter, but we both learned a tremendous amount reading it.
Do you know the photographer Alex Harris, who he worked with?
No, I do not.
He worked with him before, it looks like. DeWeese did.
Yes, he has worked with a number of photographers. We didn't connect with him until after we were pretty far along and decided we wanted to do a book. We thought he would be a natural. because of what he has already written about, and because of his affiliation with the Baez Caldera Trust.
Right. So you actually, in your research, found these two people.
Yes. And we learned about Craig through Bill's book. There's a chapter that talks about Craig's work on tree ring research and forest ecology. And so when we read that, we discovered that Craig lived in Santa Fe, and so we tracked him down.
Yeah, that was just amazing. I learned a lot. What a great study. Is there anything that you're particularly working on now?
Yes, I'm continuing to take pictures of drought and dusty conditions. I have been doing some photography with some other fellow photographers in the Galisteo Basin, and right now it's just we're just at the very beginning of looking at the influence of drought on agriculture in New Mexico.
Was this issue something that interested you before?
No, not before I lived in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to ignore here, I think.
It is, yes.
Because it's all around us all the time, and fires are they occur every year. We read continually about scarceness of water. We know that we can feel that the temperature is going up, that there are extremes of weather. I mean, it's right in front of our noses.
It is. However, some people try to ignore it.
Yes.
But I'm glad you're not. I'm glad you're focusing and following along those lines, because that's an important topic.
It seems like one of the most important topics of our time.
I think so. Now, where can people find this book?
In Santa Fe, it is available at Collected Works Bookstore.
Okay.
Garcia Street Books.
Okay.
And also Photo Eye Gallery and Bookstore.
Great.
But the publisher has a distributor, and if your listeners have a favorite local bookstore,
mm-hmm.
They can request copies.
Good. And the publisher is?
George F. Thompson.
Okay. Good. Yes, I think it's something that every New Mexican should see and look at and ponder.
Yes. Really, the book says it all.
It does say a lot. It, much more than just the essays. The photographs are incredible. Thank you so much for putting this book together and for talking with us today.
Well, thank you, Tracy. I've enjoyed it.
I have too. And that was Patricia Galagan talking about her photography book put together with her late husband, Philip Metcalf. Fire Ghosts. This is Tracy Hales-Vass with Right On Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico.
Did you enjoy that podcast? We hope that you did. And if you did, share it with your friends. And if you really want to keep podcasts like this coming, please support KSJE. You can do it easily online at ksje.com.